World champion Juan Fangio was tipped as the winner, they said, but that was before he was kidnapped from his Havana hotel. His team members tell the police how Fangio was carried off at gunpoint by Cuban rebels who wanted to sabotage the race.
We all know and love Juan Manuel Fangio. The steely and down-to-earth racing legend from Balsasce, Argentina, enjoyed incredible success over his 8 years in Formula 1 from 1950 to 1958. He currently ranks as the third most successful driver of all time, with 5 championships to his name. He also boasts the highest number of wins as a percentage of starts at 46.6%. He is referred to by many as the godfather of Formula 1, mainly because of the respect he was given by fellow drivers, as well as his influence on the sport altogether. However, in the winter of 1958, his influence was used by some Cuban revolutionaries to spread their message around the world. I mean, who better to use than El Maestro himself? So, let us set the stage. The year is 1953, and Cuban President Fulgencio Batista wants to promote Cuba as the perfect place for tourists and socialites. He decided that building various casinos in the country's capital of Havana would be the best course of action. So, with the help of a few New York mafia bosses, Lucky Luciano and Mayor Lansky to name a few, he began turning Havana into the Las Vegas of the Caribbean. In just a few years, the casinos had been built and bars had been stocked. All Batista needed now was an event to bring all the wealthy foreigners to the city. If you hadn't guessed, here's where Formula 1 comes in. Before I continue, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and smash that notification bell to be reminded of any new videos. Right, now back to the story. The first Cuban Grand Prix was held on the 25th of February in Havana. The 5.5 kilometer track ran from the Park Antonio Maceo along the Malecon waterfront and down to the Park Jose Marti Stadium, where the drivers would loop back on themselves and head back through the city. Juan Manuel Fangio won the non-championship race ahead of Carroll Shelby. By all accounts, it was a great success, with over 100,000 spectators watching with excitement as they gambled their money away into the early hours. Sadly, the same could not be said for the Cuban Grand Prix 1 year later. For the second part of the story, we need a short lesson on the political tensions in Cuba in the late 1950s. A group of Cuban revolutionaries led by Fidel Castro, situated in the Sierra de Cristal Mountains, were fighting against the military dictatorship led by President Batista. Their push against the president began in 1953 and continued to escalate over the next few years as they slowly managed to grow their movement. Even though the revolutionaries were beginning to seize power in different areas, they lacked the global recognition needed to spread their message around the world. In order to accomplish this, Castro and his revolutionaries attempted some unorthodox tactics. Right, back to Formula 1. Juan Manuel Fangio arrived in Havana alongside fellow racers Moss and Shelby for the second running of this exciting race. As I mentioned earlier, the Cuban Grand Prix is a non-championship race. This allowed the drivers to relax and enjoy the trip. Fangio and his close friend Moss splashed the cash and stayed in the swanky Hotel Lincoln in central Havana. However, on the eve of the Grand Prix, Fangio was approached by a young man in a leather jacket in the lobby of the hotel. The young man pulled out a pistol and said to Fangio, "You must come with me. I am a member of the 26th of July revolutionary movement." One of Fangio's friends attempted to help him, but the kidnapper commanded to stay still or Fangio would be shot. Fangio calmly accepted and followed the young man to the waiting car. If you hadn't connected the dots already, this young man is one of the revolutionaries under Fidel Castro, and the motive of kidnapping Fangio is simple. By kidnapping the biggest name in motorsport, it would attract international attention to the revolutionaries' cause, and hopefully attract some support from those abroad. Despite the possible threat to Fangio's life, the president ordered the race to go ahead as planned, and sent a team of policemen to hunt down the Argentine. Now, You would think Fangio may be distressed in a moment like this. However, it was quite the opposite. When asked about his friend Sterling Moss, Fangio said, "You mustn't take Sterling because he's on his honeymoon." Of course, this was a complete lie. Although Moss referred to the incident as very disturbing, Fangio saw it as just another experience, as he was convinced he was not in danger. The next morning, there was no news regarding Fangio's whereabouts, and as President Batista promised, the race would go ahead without him, while Frenchman Maurice Trintignant filled in the Maserati 450S. Fangio had even been offered a personal apology by Castro's man in Havana, Faustino Perez, for having to miss the race. Nevertheless, the lights went out without the Argentine. Sterling Moss and his fellow Ferrari driver Maston Gregory took an early lead. However, by the 5th lap it soon became apparent that there were oil leaks all over the track. The race organisers suspected that this was another intentional sabotage by the revolutionaries. However, it was instead discovered to be Roberto Mieres' Porsche that was suffering from a broken oil line. Sadly, just 1 lap later tragedy struck, as Armando Garcia Cifuentes lost control of his Ferrari and ploughed into the spectators that lined the track. Over 30 people suffered injuries, while a further 7 were killed. The race leader Moss was unaware of this horrific incident and went on to win one of the more obscure races in his career. Soon after the race, once the celebrations had been completed, Fangio was delivered back to the Argentine embassy. The whole event had been an absolute embarrassment for President Batista, and for good reason. His decision to allow the race to go ahead caused scathing world headlines against the president, and instead sided with Fidel Castro. This could be seen as one of the many steps taken by Castro to overthrow the president, and by the start of the new year, Castro's revolution had been successful, and he was instilled as the 15th Prime Minister of Cuba. It wasn't until February 1960 that the next race in Cuba was held, albeit at the slightly less glamorous Camp Columbia military airfield. This was where the history of the Cuban Grand Prix ended sadly, however, as the new communist government considered the sport as a capitalist and Western activity. As for Fangio, he retired from motorsport altogether just 5 months after his kidnapping. And in an extremely peculiar turn of events, Fangio actually became good friends with the man that kidnapped him, Arnold Rodriguez. During Fangio's time in the hands of the revolutionaries, it was said that he sympathised heavily with the revolutionaries' cause. This would explain why Fangio formed these friendships. In a 1996 interview with Wheels.com, Rodriguez spoke about visiting Fangio just a few months before he died in 1995. Fangio's legacy will be remembered for many things. His bravery to race the death traps he was put in and then beat the competition with them, but also his unique character, who saw all opportunities as just another experience. Let me know in the comments section below if you know of any other random and obscure Formula 1 stories, and make sure to like, subscribe and smash that notification bell to be reminded of any new videos.